Okay, I'd like to start the Streets and Transportation Committee meeting on October 13th at 8:13 p.m. Present are committee members Glassburn, Limpert, and Kelly. Council members Heeman, Schuman, Williamson, the mayor, and the planning director, and the finance director, and guests. On the agenda is Resolution 2020-111, which is Clegg Road ODOT safety funding. It's a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Planning and Community Development to make application to the Ohio Department of Transportation, ODOT, on behalf of the City of North Olmsted for funding for safety-related improvements to Clegg Road, and further authorizing funds for the required local match, and further authorizing the mayor to accept the grant if awarded and execute a contract for the same and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Lieber, you can take the helm, and I believe we have a presentation.
We do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This ordinance specifically is about the application to ODOT for safety funding for improvements to Clegg Road, consistent with the study that was completed this year and recently provided to City Council. I thought it would be best to go into some detail about the study and the recommendations so that Council can understand the different alternatives that were considered and how we came upon our final recommended alternative. This process began in the first quarter of this year, pre-COVID, and rapidly changed fairly dramatically, and which also changed how we had to approach this project. So we had some unique challenges related to changes in traffic patterns that we couldn't take live traffic counts because they would be different than the pre-COVID times, and also different strategies around public input. So all this will be discussed in the presentation, and there'll be some time for Q&A afterwards. I'd like to introduce Sam Bobko and Alejandro Chalk from Mott MacDonald, who have been our consultants for this project, and they'll be leading you through this presentation. And if you can hold your questions for the end, then we can answer them all at the same time. Thank you so much. Take it away, Sam and Alejandro.
Thank you, Kim. Can somebody confirm they can see my screen, PowerPoint? Yes. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for giving us time to talk here today. I'm Sam Bobko. With me is Alejandro Chalk. We are with Mott MacDonald. Thank you, Kim, Mayor Kennedy, North Olmsted, city officials. We're a local company with local staff, and we're very appreciative to be able to work on a study like this with the city of North Olmsted. We put together this overview presentation to review the background of the Clegg Road Corridor study, give everybody a status update, and talk about next steps, particularly funding and how we plan to approach that. It works out well. We would like to have done this in person, but happy that the technology is allowing us to do it this way. And I'm happy to field questions at the end of this report. We'll stick around as long as necessary. Tough act to follow after the chicken conversation, but we'll try. So our study area for this this corridor study was Clegg Road from Lorraine Road to the Westlake North Olmsted city border, which is right around Marion Road. The study did not include the Lorraine Road intersection, so we're talking just north of Lorraine. And the limits of the study mirror the limits of the resurfacing project that's scheduled for fiscal year 24 on Clegg Road. The city did a great job in recognizing that it could take advantage of that resurfacing project and potentially leverage some funds for safety and traffic improvements along Clegg Road. So the focus of our study was to address both safety and traffic congestion along Clegg, and really talk about and ensure connectivity and safety for all users, not just vehicles. It goes without saying, Clegg's a pretty important roadway, particularly for North Olmsted, because it provides connectivity to a large residential area, Clegg Park, Maple School, Lorraine Road and the commercial establishments along Lorraine, RTA bus service on Lorraine. And it's a really important roadway for the region, you know, a really solid north-south connector, access to 480 and 90, and other points of interest. So a very important corridor, both locally and regionally. On an average day, Clegg Road sees about 15,000 vehicles, and that's it's over 24-hour period. We have traffic count information pre-COVID, and then some count information over the last few months. And what we've seen is, numbers have returned to near normal along Clegg. Where the last time we took some traffic counts was about a month ago, and we were just under 15,000 vehicles for a day. So, maybe the traffic patterns aren't quite the same, but in terms of total volume along Clegg, very close to what it was this time a year ago. And, I want to mention that although Clegg Road has a lot of traffic and it's only 2 lanes in this section, and that does present some challenges, which we'll talk about. It's important to note that there are advantages to the way Clegg is set up right now. It's a residential street, and it feels that way, which helps control speeds, allows for short pedestrian crossings, like the one you see on the photo to the left, and some green space and a tree lawn offset between the roadway and the sidewalk, which just adds a bit of a feeling of comfort for those using the sidewalk. With that, I'll turn it over to Alejandro to get into a bit of the details of the crashes and the traffic analysis that we performed.
All right, thanks, thanks, Sam. Mont McDonald obtained the crash data for the Clegg Road corridor study from ODPS and ODOT, covering the years of 2015 through 2019. Over the 5-year period, there were a total of 115 crashes between Delmere Drive and the Westlake border, including 23 injury crashes. Rear end crashes were the most common along the study corridor, representing 73% of all crashes during the crash data period. And these crashes were most prevalent at the Maple Ridge Road Signalized intersection and along the corridor approaching said intersection. Overall, nearly half of all of the crashes occurred between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m., roughly in line with the typical PM peak period. Some common themes throughout the crash data included crashes during peak period congestion, crashes occurring on wet and snowy pavement conditions, and crashes involving vehicles turning onto and off of driveways and residential streets along the corridor. We should also note that there was a pedestrian crash during the crash data period, and this crash involved a pedestrian crossing Clegg near but not at the Delmere Drive intersection, and that crash occurred in 2019. On the next slide, we kind of zoom in on the Maple Ridge Road Signalized intersection. Here you can see a crash diagram that was prepared for the corridor, but zoomed into the Maple Ridge Road intersection. And as you can see on the diagram, rear end crashes are most common. And you can also see how crashes are also occurring along the approaches to the intersection, indicating that congestion is a major factor in the crash pattern at this location. So on the next slide, Mont McDonald conducted a current and future year traffic analysis along the corridor. The primary focus of this analysis, which used current year volumes and growth factors provided by NOACA, was an analysis of potential left turn lanes and the Maple Ridge Road Signalized intersection. Our left turn analysis identified Maple Ridge Road, Alexander Drive, and Frank Street and Sharon Drive as potential candidates for left turn lanes. Further analysis, however, indicated that the proximity of the Clegg Park crosswalk made a left turn lane at Alexander Drive less desirable, especially considering pedestrian usage at this crosswalk. Additionally, the proximity of Frank Street and Sharon Drive to the Maple Ridge Road intersection made a left turn lane there less desirable geometrically, especially considering that there's a high spillback rate for queues originating at Maple Ridge Road, and there's also a much larger volume demand for a left turn lane at Maple Ridge Road as opposed to Frank Street and Sharon Drive. Our analysis of the Maple Ridge Road signal identified queuing and inefficiency directly related to the lack of a left turn lane for northbound traffic. Both crashes and congestion occur due to northbound left turning traffic queuing in the northbound travel lane while waiting for gaps in southbound traffic. Our analysis of the future condition examined a dedicated northbound left turn lane at the intersection and found significant operational and safety benefits, suggesting that a left turn lane and improved signal phasing are desirable at the Maple Ridge Road Signalized intersection. I'll hand it back to Sam.
Thanks, Alejandro. After we performed that initial traffic and safety analysis, we conducted a public information session to present those findings and gather public input. The meeting was held virtually on August 5th, and we had a period of time after that where we solicited feedback. Working with Kim Lieber, a Clegg Road corridor page was created on the city's website, which you see on this slide, which contained project information, a link to the survey, and a video of our recorded public information session. We had 190 responses to the survey that we put out. Over 90% of those that responded claimed that they lived in North Olmsted, with over half of all respondents stating that they use Clegg at least once a day. We also had a really nice mix of individuals who said they drive personal passenger vehicles, private vehicles for work, Uber drivers, food delivery, walkers, bike riders, just a nice mix of individuals who responded to the survey. So we got a nice mix of feedback. Overall, respondents agreed that safety was important, no question. But feedback regarding traffic and congestion was mixed. There were basically two camps, and one side wanted to improve traffic flow and focused more on getting more vehicles through Clegg Road faster. Most of those individuals suggested widening Clegg in some way or another, or whether that be widening for additional through lanes or widening for turn lanes throughout this study corridor. The majority were opposed to widening because they felt that would only increase speeds along Clegg and really lose that residential feel. This group was more concerned with the corridor as it served all users, so pedestrians, bicyclists, and the like, not just vehicles. Another popular comment from the survey was to improve the crosswalk at Clegg Park. Suggestions differed of how to do that, but the main focus was to try to improve driver compliance, meaning when there's a pedestrian present at that crosswalk in front of the park, try to improve the crosswalk so that motorists stop when a pedestrian is present. So now I'm going to jump into some of the outcomes of the study. We took numerous considerations into account. Our initial assessment that Alejandro went over for safety and traffic, the public feedback, conversations with the city and city officials. We also worked with NOACA, Cuyahoga County, and ODOT to determine the most effective recommendations to address the goals of this study: improve safety, improve traffic congestion, and what we heard from the public, maintain that residential nature and feel of Clegg Road. Two recommendations rose to the top, and I will cover those now. We'll start at Maple Ridge. Alejandro already hinted at this. Maple Ridge is an inefficient signalized intersection, and it's not inefficient because of the way it's set up or the way it operates. It's inefficient because there's a lot of traffic and there's only one lane on each approach, and it just is what it is. It's the northbound issue seems to propagate and cause delays on some of the other approaches. So northbound approach, you have vehicles that want to go through and vehicles that want to turn left, and it only takes one vehicle that wants to turn left to back up a bunch of vehicles behind it. So our recommendation is to minimally widen Clegg to allow for a northbound left turn lane. You'll see a little sketch there on the right. This can be done within the existing right-of-way and with minor impacts outside of the existing roadway as it stands now. A left turn lane would reduce traffic backups and is also expected to decrease the number of crashes at this intersection. So again, achieving the goals of the study: safer and more efficient operation. Traffic would flow through this intersection with more ease than it does now, but still in a controlled manner. So we're not setting up Clegg to be a high-speed raceway with this improvement or this recommendation. It's very intentional because we still want this to be a comfortable place for pedestrians who want to cross Clegg and Maple Ridge. To get a little more into the details of this improvement, like I said, this northbound movement affects the whole intersection. Depending on which approach which direction you're going at this intersection, just adding a left turn lane can reduce your wait time at this intersection by 30 to 40%. So what do I mean by that? That 30-40% means if you're already at a red light, it's 30 or 40% reduction in time that you're waiting at a red light. But it also means that it's going to be a reduction in the amount of times that you're driving along this corridor and you get stopped at this intersection. And again, the benefits are for all approaches, not just that northbound approach. So think about what I said before, 15,000 people drive this corridor every day. A 30 to 40% savings in delay at waiting at a red light, stuck in traffic at this intersection, means that that's 30 to 40% savings for every vehicle that goes through here. Multiplied by 15,000 vehicles per day equates to some significant savings. Essentially, what we're saying is a more efficient signal operation, fewer cars waiting at the intersection, fewer cars backed up to Frank and Sharon and Carriage, and ultimately fewer crashes at this intersection. The second recommendation is at Clegg Park. We are proposing a pedestrian hybrid beacon to replace the existing overhead flashing beacon. A pedestrian hybrid beacon is shown to the right. This is a signal that rests in dark, which means in normal operation, there's no lights on, as you see in the picture. There are push buttons on either side, and when a pedestrian pushes that button, the signal turns on and starts in yellow, warning drivers, and then goes to a solid red. At this point, it acts as a normal traffic signal, meaning vehicles must stop and obey the solid red. And then a pedestrian signal, a walk signal, comes on for the pedestrians, letting them know that the motorists have a red light and the pedestrian can safely cross. So it's one step above what is there now, which is a pedestrian activated flashing light. This is, like I said, much more towards a full traffic signal. And the beauty of the system is it only operates when a pedestrian is present, which really enhances compliance among motorists. This is a proven to be effective, proven in Ohio, proven nationally. The closest one in our area is, I believe, is still Detroit Road in Lakewood. It was installed a year or two ago. I don't know if any others have popped up closer, but if you have not seen one up close, that's a nice place to go check one out. There's some on-street parking around there that you can get out and utilize. This picture is in a suburb similar to North Olmsted in the Cincinnati area. We had a few other minor improvements or recommendations that mostly centered around like signs and pavement markings, things that probably would be incorporated into the resurfacing project anyway. I'm not going to go into detail of those. Those are minor, really low cost things that, like I said, will be incorporated into the design of the project as it gets into resurfacing. Just a few more things I wanted to mention, some things that we looked at that we are not recommending quickly here. So we talked about widening Clegg Road. So we looked at the benefits of widening this whole corridor. And one way we considered that was a two-way left turn lane. So think about the section of Clegg from Lorain to 480. 3 lanes, the center lane is used to turn left onto a side street or a driveway. We really didn't see the benefits to safety or traffic flow with this option. And it's a difficult option to justify in this study with those goals, especially given a high price tag associated with, a complete widening of this section. So then we looked at individual turn lanes at all the side streets, and we really came up with that same conclusion. Low impact, low benefit for safety and traffic flow. There will be some advantages with providing left turn lanes everywhere for traffic on Clegg, but now you're widening the pavement. Again, costs associated with that. Be a little bit harder for traffic on side streets to pull out now that you have 2 lanes to 2 to 3 lanes to judge traffic instead of 1 to 2 lanes. So again, negatives associated with putting turn lanes everywhere. A third option we looked at was at Maple Ridge, adding a right turn lane from Maple Ridge to Clegg. So this would be an eastbound right lane. We did see a small increase in signal efficiency if we did this, but we would not expect a safety benefit, number one, for vehicles, and number two, we're really making it more difficult for pedestrians at that intersection. Widening the intersection, we would be taking away time that the pedestrians would have to cross both streets, and felt like this didn't fall in line with our goal to improve safety for all users. Furthermore, a right turn lane on Maple Ridge would have both property and utility impacts on that corner. And then finally, we looked at what's called the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. You may have seen these around. That's the picture on the left. Basically an enhancement of what you already have on Clegg at Clegg Park. Just flashes at a little bit different rate, trying to get drivers' attention. Can be mounted on a pole like this one in Fairview or overhead. Ultimately, we felt that was too similar to what you had out there, and we felt, going one step higher with the pedestrian hybrid beacon made more sense. So where are we at in the schedule? We're at step 4 over here, which is we've prepared a final report, and that's what we're presenting to you now. And then the next task in this step would be to apply for safety funding if that's the direction the city wants to move. Then it would be the resurfacing project, and any outcomes from this safety related project would go into at a later date detailed design and then ultimately construction. So let's talk about funding for a minute. Now that I've given you all the background of the study. So 2 big goals of this study. Number 1, identify ways to improve traffic and safety. And number 2, to incorporate these improvements into the resurfacing project. Simply put, the resurfacing project really presented a great opportunity for the city, and you guys are wisely taking advantage of that opportunity to leverage some funding. So based on the types and locations of crashes occurring on this corridor, the stuff Alejandro went through, as well as the recommended improvements discussed by both the city, county, NOACA, and ODOT, the Ohio Department of Transportation's safety funding aligns well with the goals of this study. This is a funding source that's federal money that's driven through the state, through ODOT, and it's a highly competitive process, but Clegg Road will be a strong candidate for this funding source because it meets the requirements and goals of ODOT's safety program. Their safety program and any application for funding really has to be rooted in safety. And so, our recommendations that we presented to you today are definitely rooted in safety. They address the goals of providing a safer environment for all users, not just vehicles. Obviously, the pedestrian hybrid beacon is meant to provide safety for pedestrians. So we've addressed vehicle safety, pedestrian safety, and tried not to compromise anything in doing so with these recommendations. The engineer's estimate at this point for what we shared with you, a northbound left turn lane at Maple Ridge, a new signal if necessary due to that widening, and the pedestrian hybrid beacon and everything that goes along with that, comes out to about $480,000. It includes inflation for 2024 construction, as well as a 30% contingency that ODOT likes to see when you apply for funding. And the way this works is there's a one-page funding application, and ODOT basically handles this in a two-step process. The first step is, do they agree with the recommendations, and do they want to fund the recommendations? That's step one. And then if they decide to fund the recommendations, step two is at what percentage. And ODOT will fund up to 90% of the asking amount. So if the asking amount is $480,000, ODOT can fund up to 90% of that. And they do require a 10% local match. So one or two more slides, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. I really want to end with this. You know, there's so many things that make a street great. Clegg really does have a lot going for it. I can't stress enough that you're doing this right, supplementing the resurfacing project with safety and traffic congestion improvements to make Clegg even better for all users and for the city as a whole. So where do we go from here? Mont McDonald is still on board to help out, to assist in preparing the safety application and submitting and working with ODOT if that's the direction the city wants to take. Again, it's a competitive process, and the sooner an application is submitted, the better. The state has a pot of money, and they renew that pot of money from time to time, but right now is a good time to get in and get an application in. The window is open. We have talked to ODOT. We've been in pretty consistent communication since the study started back in June with ODOT, and the feedback has been very positive in terms of meeting the goals of ODOT's safety program. And they've even provided some tips for us and for the city should they choose to apply for a safety application. So that's it. Kim, I'll turn it over to you, and happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chair, I'll hold any further comment. I'd open it up to council committee discussion, questions, or any other feedback from council that we can answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lieber. So a couple questions that I had for either Mr. Bobko or Mr. Chalk. First one is, what are the anticipated utility or property implications of the Maple Ridge turning lane, of adding that? Do we foresee any issues with that from a utility or property standpoint?
So for the recommended northbound left turn lane, the way I'll put it now is we did not get into detailed design with this study, but we took the design far enough to be fairly confident that we will not be impacting any properties, and that all the work will be within where the existing sidewalk is now, so not even impacting the sidewalk. Likely with the widening, we'll require new curb ramps at least two of the corners of the intersection, and that's included in the cost estimate. The utilities, maybe the big one is drainage, and we talked about looking into that a little further. There is an open drainage system, meaning ditches and inlets in the tree lawns in this area, and widening would impact the way water flows off of the roadway and where it goes and how it needs to be collected, and with the existing system in place. So we've included costs in that cost estimate to handle drainage at this intersection. In terms of other impacts, we think we can avoid utility poles, and like I said, maybe the one other thing is the existing signal poles. Depending on the widening and what detailed design would bear out, we think it's likely that the existing signal poles would be impacted, and therefore we've included cost in that funding for new signal poles as well.
Great. And then a second question I had was from a cost perspective, what is the difference in cost for the beacon lighting versus either what we have today or the the Fairview example you gave?
The pedestrian hybrid beacon is somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70,000. I'll pull up the cost estimate we put together here in a second, and that's based on a number from ODOT and what ODOT has paid for these systems in recently throughout the state, but it also includes the one in Lakewood too is in that as a go by for what these things cost. The system I showed, the sign that's in Fairview, runs 20 to 40,000. There's some bells and whistles that can be included in that. The one in Fairview, I think, costs 25,000, and that's one sign on either side of the street, solar powered, and those are not overhead. Those are mounted on the side of the street. So that's the price difference between those options. And we looked into, could we reuse the support you have now for the existing sign and flashing lights? And it's not likely, and that's just a matter of the amount of the equipment that needs to go on the new sign and wind loading, and just ensuring that the support that we would put up would be capable, and then some, to handle the signals that would need to go on that support.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'm going to open it up. Any questions from committee? Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Limpert. What I didn't hear on here when it came to the Alexander Road area is the fact that Alexander Road is cut through from Clegg Road to get to Fairview Park, and from Clegg Road to get to West 231st Street to get up to Lorraine, to bypass that whole area of Clegg. And the fact that left turn lane isn't necessary in that area, I totally disagree with. I've lived on Alexander Road majority of my life, and Clegg Road definitely needs a left turn lane, at least in that area, if not some of the others. Also, the fact that that cross right there would be affected by a left turn lane, I don't accept that either, because if you go north into Westlake, you'll see that that crossing on Clegg Road have the same type of crosswalk that goes to their Clegg Park, is 3 lanes wide. So they don't have an issue with that either. That's my comment. Thank you.
Mr. Glassburn?
Thank you, Chairman Limpert. I guess I have a number of questions, so I'll ask a few, and maybe you'll want to allow other members to ask and then come back to me. My first question is the report doesn't really say what the costs are for alternatives 1 and 3. Could you please address what those costs are?
Yeah, we didn't get too in depth with cost on those because we ruled them out early on in the process for not meeting the goals of the study. A 3-lane section is something it happens, going from a 4 to a 3-lane section or a 2 to a 3-lane section is not uncommon. And so that's something that we could come up with a pretty quick ballpark cost for widening from 2 to 3 lanes, and including both pavement and drainage that would go along with that.
Thank you. it was mentioned that if we expanded that turning lane south of Maple, that we could do that with just tree lawns and not impact utilities and sidewalks. The homes are pretty uniformly, and those tree lawns are pretty uniformly the same width from Lorraine to the Westlake border. Why wouldn't that be the case for the entire length from Lorraine to Westlake, or is that not, where would that not be the case?
No, you're correct. It would be if Clegg was widened to 3 lanes throughout the corridor, yeah, that sidewalk offset is essentially the same throughout. So what I was saying where we would have some other impacts would be if we also widened Maple Ridge to add another turn lane, so to have a left and a right lane on Maple Ridge. Then we'd be getting into some issues. But as it stands now, whether we just widen at individual locations, like on Clegg at Maple Ridge, or if Clegg was widened throughout, yeah, you're correct that the sidewalk offset is pretty uniform throughout the corridor.
So if I read the report correctly, the biggest...
Sorry, Mr. Glassburn,
yes?
if you could just hold on 1 second, I have a follow up on that.
Yep.
So when we were talking about the Maple Ridge area, when you're talking about extending it, you would essentially have the sidewalk next to the curb in that area of the turning lane. Is that kind of the expectation?
No, you'd still have a tree lawn.
Okay.
Yeah, there's still room for, I believe, well, I'll pull up the numbers here in a minute, but there's still room for grass between the curb and the sidewalk.
Okay. And would that be the same where Mr. Glassburn was talking about?
Yeah, it's fairly uniform throughout this corridor. So from where the roadway ends to where the sidewalk begins is pretty consistent throughout. So any widening on Clegg would have the same or close to the same, minimal impacts on properties and still allow room from a curb to a sidewalk for some tree lawn.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The biggest impediment that I saw in the study to 3 lanes was, aside from potentially price, was the issue of roads like Frank that are close to the Maple intersection, or where 2 roads don't meet up squarely in a 4-way intersection. What are some of the ways in which, when you deal with these types of intersections or situations, that those problems are ameliorated if you do have a situation like we would contemplate with a 3rd lane for turning?
Sure. So I put this picture. If is my screen still sharing?
Yes.
Okay. So I put this picture in to really discuss that point. So when you have offset intersections like this, the pink arrow represents a northbound movement, so a vehicle that wants to turn left. The purple would be a southbound movement that wants to turn left. When you have 2 lanes, those vehicles stop in the through lane, which presents some issues of its own, but can be done just by stopping in your own lane. When you add a 3rd lane or left turn lanes, when you have intersections that are offset like these are, which there are several along this corridor, you get to this point where vehicles will overlap each other in those left turn lanes. And that was one of the concerns. There are lots of examples in our area of where this happens, where turn lanes were put in and new crash patterns formed. And unfortunately, when vehicles, even if they are slowing, when crashes are head on, that typically represents more severe types of crashes. So what is done to answer your question in similar situations? I think I could point to a few in Strongsville and Rocky River that were signalized, where traffic volumes weren't high enough for traffic signals. However, they put them in because to avoid this type of overlap. And I'd say from my professional opinion on those situations, they've just created more problems, putting a traffic signal where one isn't warranted. Another option is to realign the intersections, which is a big undertaking and would include major property impacts for small traffic impact. So the approach to not widen through some of these offset intersections was very much rooted in trying to prevent a new crash trend from forming at some of these locations.
My last question, Mr. Chair, for the moment, and then I'll yield to others, is it was mentioned, I believe by Mr. Bobko, but it might have been Mr. Chalk, that a majority of residents were against the third turning lane concept. I didn't see a clear question, the multiple choices that would say that either way, and I quickly tried to read through the comments again, and I read 14 that explicitly were in favor and 6 were against. So I guess, and a number of others mentioned congestion, but didn't specifically say turning lanes or widening as the solution. Did I mishear, or where was the conclusion that a majority of residents were against the turning lanes coming from?
That information was solely what we pulled out of the comments section of the survey. So yeah, there wasn't a specific question that got into that one way or another. So like you did, we went through the comments, and yeah, I guess to be honest about it, we're trying to summarize comments that when it's not a multiple choice answer, sometimes there's a little ambiguity in what is being stated, but it was simply us going through all the comments, and this slide here was simply taking all the words in the comments section and just pulling out the words that were most frequently stated, with turning lane and Clegg Park and crosswalk being the 2 most used words in the comment section, and then try to drill down into those comments a little bit more. So yeah, same as you, just trying to read into the comments section of the survey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just state, and I don't want to belabor this point too hard. Again, I counted 14 positive, 6 negative. This is 20 responses out of 190. I'm not sure that we should read one way or another, quite frankly, as to that the comments have said anything about that issue. But I'll yield for now and have more questions later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let me open that up to council. Are there any questions from council? Any follow-up questions from Mr. Glassburn?
Okay. So it was mentioned that the third item aside from the turning lane and the crosswalk considerations was flooding issues. Right now, despite the Lorraine-Clegg intersection being actually higher elevation than between Clegg and Maple, we have substantial, when it rains, substantial pooling and flooding at Clegg and Lorraine. So I guess I like the concept of trying to do something towards flooding, but I'm not sure that we have nearby places to put that water. So was that part of the consideration, or was that a challenge that you looked at?
So that's more of a detail for the design. Definitely when it showed up in the crash data that there were an above average number of crashes on wet pavement. I mean, that stands out. But from a safety standpoint, that typically is something that would be addressed by a resurfacing project. So both, new pavement with higher friction, and then any drainage would be worked out, as part of that detailed design process for the resurfacing. But yes, we did consider that when we talked about widening at Maple Ridge, knowing that we would impact, where the ditches and inlets are now at that intersection. That's why we included a cost to account for new drainage systems, at least at that intersection. But overall, from a safety standpoint, the crash trend that we saw with higher than average crashes on wet pavement, we didn't directly address, because that's something that would be addressed by a new course of pavement and the resurfacing project.
Sam, if I may add real quick, and excuse me, but I just wanted to add that part of the discussion on drainage is another reason why the alternative of a full two-way left turn lane was moved aside towards a more targeted approach at Maple Ridge Road, because by looking at Maple Ridge Road, you minimize the amount of additional pavement on the corridor. And you were talking, Mr. Glassburn, about where that water will go. The left turn lane minimizes the additional pavement along the corridor while maximizing the operational and safety benefits for the corridor. So that discussion was also had in the development of improvements.
I guess this last one is more of a statement than a question. In talking to residents prior to COVID, the residents on Clegg itself, between Maple and Lorraine, were the most concerned about losing their frontage and most suspicious of expanding. I have a fear that the public reaction to this proposal, once it's understood, is that we're in some ways going to be getting the worst of all worlds, in that the residents that are most prone to be annoyed by this are going to be the ones that actually are impacted. The rest of the residents that live off of side streets and north of Maple that were less concerned about this won't actually get the turning lanes they want. And that we lose an opportunity here. So, Mr. Chair, I just, I would like to see more information about the turning lanes being, whether they're entirely the rest of the way or in places, or a different suggestion, to see costs and to again look at if there are alternatives to addressing Mr. Bobko's concerns about the offset intersections. I mean, we have this exact turning lane set up south of Lorraine, and while we don't have opposite sides of the street, we do have some pretty weird side streets coming off. So folks have learned to deal with it, and the residents south of Lorraine are very happy with the turning lane that they have. So with that, I guess I'll yield, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Glassburn. I mean, so to Mr. Bobko and Mr. Chalk, I mean, I'd like to thank you. I do see a benefit to keeping Clegg Road from becoming a 3-lane thoroughfare where speeds will increase likely, and also just from the overall, while the property may not be impacted by cutting into their property, it will make it feel a lot smaller to all those homes that are close by to the road there. But I do see Mr. Kelly's point on some of these areas where, they're still going to deal with the same issues. What I would like to hear about is how does this typically impact, so improving the traffic flow northbound by adding the turning lane at Maple. Typically, when you do this, how does that 30 to 40% efficiency impact those coming south? Because I think that's where Mr. Kelly's concern is the, right now they're currently struggling to use those left turns. With it increased volume, is that anticipated to make it more difficult, the same, or how does that increase the ability for the the southbound traffic be able to make left turns based on this plan?
Yeah, so the statement I made about improving traffic in all directions with a northbound left is specific to the intersection. So, talking specifically about vehicles stopped at a red light at Maple Ridge, regardless of what direction you're traveling. So overall, a northbound left makes this traffic signal much more efficient and improves all approaches. So my comments were specific to the intersection. To take that further and discuss, the ability for vehicles to turn left from Clegg to side streets and from side streets on the Clegg. The really, from a traffic engineer perspective, having a traffic signal, almost halfway between Lorraine and Westwood, the spacing of that signal works really nice for a couple reasons. Number one, it gives an opportunity for pedestrians to cross Clegg with a signal. And, while you don't want to provide, signals everywhere for that purpose, having nicely spaced crossing locations is a benefit. So that's number one. Number two, having a signal in the middle of this, in between two other signals in Westwood and Lorraine, also allows traffic to break up a little or to be metered, if you will. So when Clegg is red and vehicles are stopped in the northbound direction, that does provide gaps for southbound vehicles. So we're making Maple more efficient, the signal at Maple, and so the comments about how does it affect all directions of traffic, that's specific to the intersection itself.
Thank you. And just from a traffic engineer perspective, does adding a clean turn lane like that actually reduce speeds for those that were stopped at the light? I'm the only reason I'm asking that is, Mr. Kelly brought up the point of trying to be able to turn left further north, and I just know from my own experiences driving that when and I used to make that left turn on Maple on a daily basis, a lot of traffic would drastically accelerate once that car finally made the turn on the green light to try to get through that light. And I'm wondering, just from a traffic, is there any studies on that? Does that reduce speeds, or like you said, it opens up the flow by having that clean turn lane there, that it would get benefits further north on those trying to turn left?
Yeah, I guess the best way I can answer that is if you're northbound and you want to turn left now and you're waiting for a gap in traffic to do so, you stop, the vehicle behind you stops. One of the benefits of a left turn lane is you pull those left turn vehicles out of the through traffic stream. So that's the big safety benefit. When we talk about speeds, I think the way I described it earlier was, we're improving the efficiency of the signal, but still controlled. A good thing for traffic is consistent speeds. So to not have vehicles have to slow down and then speed up through here, to maintain a speed through the intersection because a left turn vehicle is not stopped in the through lane, but rather in their own lane in this proposed condition. Just provide some uniformity with speed. I can't really speak to, do I think it's will keep speeds or slow speeds down or increase speeds. All I can say is it'll provide more consistency for vehicles traveling through this intersection. Fewer stops and starts.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Schuman? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Kelly's and Mr. Glassburn's discussion about these turn lanes, I think anybody who travels North Olmsted, shops on Lorraine Road, knows how to deal with those turn lanes. I mean, we got to be experts at it compared to most folks. I think the situation like the situation on Alexander, this is something like this is a one shot. We got an opportunity to make these improvements. I'd like to see us maximize it, do as many of these improvements as we can. I mean, I understand that there are some places where it would be just too choppy to do it, but like I say, for the most part, I think North Olmsted drivers, I mean, you go to the bank in North Olmsted, you got to know how to use those turn lanes. You got to be able to deal with that with 4 lanes of traffic and a turn lane in the middle. You got to be able to do it. That's where I taught my kids how to drive was Lorraine Road. I figured if they could do that, they could drive anywhere in the world. So to their point, I'd like to see us maximize this. I think we're not going to be doing this again. So let's try to fix it as much as we can. Thank you.
If I could just comment on that real quick, Mr. Schuman and Mr. Kelly, to your, the points you made, and Mr. Glassburn. I think Alejandro said it a few minutes ago. This study was rooted in safety and traffic, and we wanted to be very take a targeted approach. So use data. What do we have? We had crash data. We have traffic data. Use that information to help us focus in on the areas where we could provide the biggest impact. And so I don't disagree. I grew up off of Alexander. I know the area well. Probably coming into this study, one of my first thoughts was, a turn lane onto Alexander. But first and foremost, the crashes aren't there to support it, and it would be a tough sell, at least for this funding source. It's not something that's I guess explicitly rooted in safety with the data that we have, the crash data and then the traffic data. So we tried to be very targeted and focused in our approach on this study.
Thank you, Mr. Bobko. Mr. Kelly, you had a point from committee, and then Mrs. Heeman after that. Ms. Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Lippert. I appreciate what you just said. I can see the benefit of the left turn lane at Maple Ridge, but I would certainly, as Mr. Schuman said, I would certainly like to see more info about the left turn lane, even if it's a common one on Clegg Road. And this is our opportunity to fix this traffic issue we have on this road. Thank you.
Ms. Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in a simplistic way on these turn lanes, these are different lengths, right, from point A to point B as we're going down Clegg Road. So how many cars can be accommodated in the average turning lane that would be proposed here. So it's moving 3 cars off on, into a turning lane, or 4 cars, or sometimes what happens, I've noticed that, the cars will come from farther back to try to scoot around the forward moving traffic to get into that turning lane. And that's causing a different sort of safety hazard, because some folks are waiting patiently to arrive at the turning lane, right, to be in it. So what's the length of the average turning lane you're proposing, and what's the accommodation of cars? Thank you.
So this, the turn lane we're proposing on Maple Ridge, we basically capped at Frank and Sharon, and the idea was to not have vehicles enter a turn lane before those intersections. So to start the turn lane just after Frank and Sharon. A typical turn lane, 20 to 25 feet per car, and that includes the car and the space that drivers normally leave in between cars. ODOT won't let you put in a turn lane less than 50 feet, so 2 cars minimum. So this turn lane here, I believe, Alejandro, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're at somewhere at like 200 feet. The recommended northbound left turn lane, and so at 20 to 25 cars, if they're packed in, you can get 10 cars in a space like that, which even pulling out 1 to 2 cars from a through traffic stream can have benefits, but again, taking that same approach of a targeted approach, a turn lane like this was designed to accommodate the traffic that's out there now, and even some room for some growth and an increase in traffic if that should happen.
So Sam, I just wanted to add on to that a little bit. It is about 175 to 200 feet, depending on the exact detailed design of what the left turn lane would be. I wanted to add that we show in the image here on the right that little bit of a taper immediately to the north of the Frank Street Sharon Drive intersection. And we did that, like Sam said, specifically to make sure that people were entering the turn lane north of the Frank Street Sharon Drive intersection, but also for southbound traffic to clearly show that turn lane, that pavement there, is for northbound left turning vehicles. One of the concerns and thoughts we had while we were putting this together was for southbound left turning vehicles to make sure that they didn't for any reason think that the left turn lane being provided for Maple Ridge Road was actually a left turn lane for southbound to Sharon Drive. So you can take it all the way back to Sharon Drive, which would be closer to about 200, 215 feet. As shown in this picture here, it's about 175 to 200 feet. But again, that's specifically to ensure that we don't introduce any kind of head-on left turning movements, and to clearly identify that pavement as left turn pavement for Maple Ridge Road. Thank you.
A follow-up, Mr. Chair, if I may. So, and this light will be controlled in our, syncing system along with all of our other lights in the city. So that timing can be altered if need be and quickly. I'm assuming, yes? Yeah. Director Lieber's going, yes. Thank you. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, sorry, one last point that I didn't bring up before. With Alexander and the entrance to Little Clegg Park being so close together, if you ever try to get out from Alexander onto Clegg Road during the baseball season or any other sport that they have there, which generally is right about afternoon rush hour time, you've got 1 to 2 cars stopped to try to make a left turn into Little Clegg, and everything that's heading northbound is just stopped dead, and people do not give the courtesy most of the time to not block the intersection. So there's an issue there also with the entrance to Clegg Park, for the sporting things, and it gets to be a real mess up there with no way to get that vehicle out of the traveled lane northbound. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mont McDonald at this time? Okay, thank you. Ms. Lieber, how do you want to proceed? I think we're going to want to hold this into committee to get a few more questions gathered, posed over to you, and you know, from there, I have one more meeting here to kind of clean up those questions. So, what would be a good time frame? Do you think if I can get the questions here over the course of this week to slate it for next committee sessions? I understand that we don't have the 100%. We're at 90% now. That may not make this as urgent to get our application in.
I would think 2 weeks, Sam, to have the information, like for a meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that works.
That'd be fine.
Okay, so at this time, I'm going to make a motion to hold this in committee and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 Okay, and then Mrs. Lieber, if, or I should say committee and council, if you can get your questions to Chuck this week so that the Mont McDonald team can have those with enough time to do proper due diligence on that, we can follow up with the meeting during next committee cycle. Okay, I'm seeing Mrs. Lieber nodding. So at this time, I'd like to close the Streets and Transportation Committee at 9:20. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mont McDonald. That was a great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time.